The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Chen's penthouse office, casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. At 42, he had everything money could buy: a tech empire worth billions, a luxury apartment overlooking the city, and a garage full of cars that cost more than most people's homes. Yet something felt hollow in his chest as he adjusted his custom-made suit and stared at his reflection in the window. His assistant knocked softly before entering. "Mr. Chen, your fiancé called again about the wedding venue." He nodded absently, his mind drifting to another time, another life, 12 years ago. Back then, he wasn't James Chen, the tech billionaire. He was just James, a struggling entrepreneur with big dreams, living in a tiny apartment with. He pushed the thought away. He'd buried that part of his life deep inside, or so he thought. His phone buzzed with another message from Lily, his socialite fiancée, something about flower arrangements and guest lists. Their upcoming wedding was splashed across every business and society magazine. The perfect power couple, they called them. "Sir?" His assistant's voice pulled him back to reality. "There's an envelope for you." It came through personal delivery. She placed a cream-colored envelope on his desk before quietly leaving. James reached for it, noting there was no return address. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it, something that hadn't happened since his early pitching days. Inside, he found 4 identical school photos, each showing the same face. A young girl, about 12, with his mother's eyes and a familiar smile he tried to forget. He dropped the photos like they'd burned him. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. 4 identical faces. Impossible. His mind raced back to that rainy night 12 years ago when he packed a small bag, told Anna he had a business trip, and walked away from their modest apartment. She'd been 2 months pregnant then. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Chen, the board is waiting for the quarterly meeting." "Cancel it," he said, his voice hoarse. "Cancel everything today." He picked up one of the photos again, studying the young face. The girl had Anna's gentle smile, but his determined eyes. The timestamp on the photo was recent, taken this school year. 4 identical photos. 4 identical girls. The weight of what he'd walked away from crashed over him like a tidal wave. His phone rang, Lily again. The diamond ring she wore cost more than his entire year's salary back then. He let it go to voicemail as he stared at the photos spread across his desk. In the corner of each photo, written in different colored ink, were 4 names: Rose, Iris, Violet, and Daisy. James sank into his chair, the empire he built suddenly feeling like a house of cards. The city stretched out below him, a concrete jungle he'd conquered, but now it felt like it was closing in. He'd left to chase his dreams, convinced he couldn't handle the responsibility of a family, terrified of becoming a father. Now, looking at these 4 identical faces, he realized he'd run away from something far more precious than all his billions. He opened his laptop, hands shaking as he typed quadruplet birth records and his old city's name. The cursor blinked mockingly at him as he hesitated, knowing that pressing enter would change everything. The perfectly constructed world he built, the carefully maintained facade of the successful billionaire, it was all about to crack. The photos seemed to watch him, 4 pairs of eyes holding him accountable for 12 years of absence. In the distance, he could hear the usual sounds of his office: phones ringing, elevator doors opening and closing, the quiet hum of success he'd worked so hard to achieve. But for the first time in 12 years, none of it mattered. His finger hovered over the enter key. Outside his office, the city continued its busy rhythm, unaware that in this quiet moment, a man's carefully constructed life was about to unravel. The truth he'd been running from had finally caught up with him, wrapped in a cream-colored envelope and delivered with 4 identical smiles. James Chen, the billionaire who could buy anything, was about to discover the true cost of his choices. And somewhere in the city, 4 12-year-old girls were about to turn his world upside down. Anna Liu stood in her small therapy office, adjusting the colorful artwork made by her young clients. Sunlight filtered through the window, catching the silver strands in her dark hair, each one earned during those first difficult years. The wall behind her desk displayed not 1, but 4 identical kindergarten graduation photos, a reminder of her greatest blessing and challenge. 12 years earlier, she'd sat alone in a doctor's office, still wearing her wedding ring, when the ultrasound technician's eyes had widened. Mrs. Liu, I'm seeing multiple heartbeats. 4 tiny hearts, beating in perfect sync. The memory of that moment still brought tears to her eyes, joy mixed with overwhelming fear. James had been gone for 3 weeks by then, his phone disconnected, his email returning automatic responses. The sound of laughter drifted through her office window. Outside, in the small garden she'd planted with the girls, her daughters were working on their science project. At 12, they were identical in appearance but completely different in spirit. Rose, the eldest by 2 minutes, was carefully measuring plant growth. Iris sat cross-legged with her laptop, recording data. Violet sketched the plants in her notebook, while Daisy entertained everyone with her running commentary. "Mom," Daisy's voice carried through the window. "Our genetics homework is weird. Teacher says identical siblings have the same DNA, but we're all so different." Anna smiled, remembering the day she'd brought them home from the hospital. 4 tiny babies, each weighing less than 5 pounds. The nurses had helped her color-code their blankets because telling them apart had been impossible at first. Now she could recognize each girl by the smallest gestures: Violet's shy smile, Rose's determined walk, Iris's thoughtful pauses, Daisy's energetic bounce. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Zhang, her elderly neighbor who'd been like a grandmother to the girls. "The girls' science video is trending on the school website. So proud." Anna clicked the link, watching her daughters explain their project about hereditary traits. They were studying how identical siblings could develop different personalities despite sharing the same DNA. The irony wasn't lost on her. Their father had been obsessed with technology, dreaming of building the next big tech company. Now his daughters had inherited his brilliance, but with something he'd lacked: heart. She remembered those early days after James left. The pregnancy had been difficult, her body struggling to nurture 4 growing lives. She'd worked from her hospital bed, determined to keep her small therapy practice alive. The doctors had warned her about the risks, but she'd felt those 4 hearts beating inside her, giving her strength she didn't know she had. The community had rallied around her. Mrs. Zhang brought home-cooked meals. Her clients waited patiently when she needed to reschedule. The local mothers group organized a rotation to help during the first months. Those acts of kindness had taught her daughters the most important lesson: family wasn't just about DNA. "Mom," this time it was Rose calling. "Can you help us? We found something interesting in our research." Anna walked to the garden, where 4 identical faces looked up at her with varying expressions. Rose held her tablet, showing a news article about a successful tech startup from 12 years ago. There, in the grainy photo, stood a younger James Chen, accepting his first major investment. "He looks like Uncle David," Iris said thoughtfully, referring to their mother's brother. "Just some random article for our project," Rose added quickly, but Anna saw the questions in their eyes. They were too smart not to notice the similarities, too curious not to wonder. She sat down on the garden bench, her heart heavy with a familiar ache. Sooner or later, they would discover the truth. These brilliant girls who could build apps and program robots would eventually uncover their own history. The question wasn't if, but when. For now, though, they were absorbed in their project again. Violet was explaining how environmental factors could influence gene expression, while Daisy acted out different personality types, making her sisters laugh. Anna watched them, marveling at how 4 identical seeds had grown into such unique flowers. In her pocket, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Mrs. Zhang. "Did you see?" Their video was shared by the National Science Foundation's page. Anna clicked the link, pride mixing with anxiety. Their little garden project was gaining attention. How long before those 4 familiar faces caught someone else's eye? James Chen sat in his private office after hours, time loosened, surrounded by stacks of papers. His laptop screen glowed with dozens of open tabs, old news articles, social media profiles, and public records. The 4 school photos sat propped against his coffee cup, those young faces watching his every move. "Sir," his head of security spoke from the doorway, "I have the preliminary report you requested." The man placed a thick folder on his desk, hesitating before adding, "It's quite remarkable, actually." James opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photos of a small but cheerful therapy office, its windows bright with children's artwork. A modest house with a thriving garden. 4 girls in matching science club t-shirts, accepting a regional robotics trophy. Each image felt like a punch to his gut, glimpses of the life he'd walked away from. Meanwhile, across town in their cozy living room, the girls were having their own investigation session. Rose had borrowed her mom's old laptop, while Iris worked her magic with public records databases. "Look at this," Violet whispered, showing her sisters an old business magazine cover. "Chen Technologies' founder looks exactly like Uncle David, but it's not him. The dates match up too." Daisy, usually the loudest, was unusually quiet as she scrolled through her tablet. "His company is sponsoring the National STEM Competition Finals next month, the one we qualified for with our app." The girls huddled closer, their identical faces illuminated by screen light. Their app, designed to help single parents find resources and support, had started as a way to thank their mom. Now it felt like destiny. Back in his office, James watched a video of the regional science fair. The girls were presenting their project, finishing each other's sentences with a natural rhythm that spoke of years of togetherness. Their project display showed pictures of DNA helixes and family trees. "I found this too, sir," his security chief said quietly, sliding over a screenshot of a social media post. It showed Anna at a local award ceremony, accepting a community leader award for her work with children. She looked older but still beautiful, her smile gentle but strong. The caption mentioned her as a single mother of quadruplets who'd built a successful therapy practice while raising her daughters. James clicked through more photos from the science fair. Each girl wore a different colored ribbon in her hair, the only way to tell them apart. Rose spoke with authority about data analysis. Iris handled the technical demonstrations. Violet explained their research methodology. Daisy charmed the judges with real-world applications. They were brilliant, just like he'd been at their age, but with something more, a warmth and compassion that came from being raised by Anna. His phone rang, displaying Lily's name again. His fiancée was getting frustrated with his distraction, demanding to know why he cancelled their dinner plans 3 nights in a row. How could he explain that his perfectly planned life was unraveling? In their bedroom, the quadruplets were still awake long past bedtime, their investigation spreading across 4 identical beds, pushed together to form a giant workspace. "The STEM finals are in 2 weeks, Rose said, her voice barely a whisper. "He'll be there." "Mom doesn't know we found out," Iris reminded them, closing her laptop. Violet hugged her pillow tight. "What if he doesn't want to meet us?" "Then it's his loss," Daisy declared, though her voice wavered slightly. "We've got Mom. We've got each other." They fell silent as footsteps approached their door. Quick as lightning, laptops disappeared under pillows and tablets slid beneath blankets. Anna peeked in, finding 4 seemingly sleeping girls. "My little scientists," she whispered fondly, not fooled for a second but letting them pretend. As their mother's footsteps faded, 4 pairs of eyes opened in the darkness. They'd inherited more than just their father's tech skills, they had his determination too. The STEM competition wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about answers. James stared at his office ceiling, dawn breaking over the city. The investigation had revealed more than he'd expected. His daughters weren't just successful students, they were extraordinary. They'd created something meaningful, born from their own experience. While he'd been building his empire of circuits and silicon, they'd been building something far more valuable, a true family. The STEM competition finals loomed 2 weeks away. In 14 days, he would come face to face with the lives he abandoned. The thought terrified him more than any business deal ever had. The National STEM competition finals buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of young innovators filled the convention center, their projects displayed on rows of tables. Near the main stage, 4 identical girls in matching blue dresses with different colored sashes made final adjustments to their presentation. "He's here," Iris whispered, pretending to fix her tablet screen. Through the crowd, they could see James Chen, their father, talking to competition officials. He looked exactly like the photos they'd studied, though his hair had touches of gray at the temples. Rose straightened their display board. "Focus on the presentation, that's what matters." But her hands trembled as she typed on her laptop. Violet kept glancing at the entrance. "Mom's parking the car. She'll be here any minute." "Deep breaths, everyone," Daisy said, unusually serious. "We've practiced this a million times." James moved through the crowd, his heart pounding. He'd rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, but nothing had prepared him for seeing them in person. Their project booth was decorated with graphs and charts, showing how their app had already helped hundreds of single parents in their community. Mr. Chen, a competition organizer, approached. "We're so honored to have you here. Would you like to start with the finalists in Section A?" "Actually," he said, his mouth dry, "I'd like to see the Single Parent Resource App project." At their booth, the girls tensed as footsteps approached. They'd planned for this moment, practiced what they'd say, but now it felt surreal. Rose gripped her tablet tighter. Iris fiddled with her blue sash. Violet tucked her hair behind her ear. Daisy took a deep breath. "Good morning," James said softly, his voice barely steady. "Could you tell me about your project?" 4 pairs of eyes, his mother's eyes, looked back at him. The moment stretched like elastic ready to snap. "Our app connects single parents with local resources," Rose began professionally, though her voice quivered slightly. "It helps them find everything from affordable childcare to support groups," Iris continued, tapping the screen to show the interface. "We included a community feature where parents can share advice," Violet added quietly. "Because sometimes," Daisy said, looking directly at him, "one parent has to be enough." James felt the weight of their words, saw the careful calculation behind them. Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. "Girls, sorry I'm late. Parking was—" Anna stopped mid-sentence, seeing James at their booth. 12 years fell away in an instant. The convention center continued its busy hum, oblivious to the drama unfolding at booth 23. Other students practiced their pitches. Judges moved from table to table. But in their small corner, time seemed to freeze. "Mom," Daisy broke the silence, her voice unusually high. "The judges want to see our community impact statistics." Anna straightened her shoulders, slipping into the role of supportive mother. "Of course. Let's pull those up." She moved to the laptop, careful not to look at James. "Mrs. Liu," James managed, formal and stiff, "your daughters have created something remarkable." "They did," she replied quietly. "They do remarkable things every day." The girls watched this exchange like a tennis match, years of questions burning in their throats. Around them, the competition buzzed with activity, but their booth felt like an island of silent tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcement system crackled. "Judging will begin in 5 minutes. All finalists, please prepare your presentations." "We should get ready," Rose said, her practical nature taking over. "Good luck," James offered, the words feeling hollow and insufficient. He turned to leave, then paused. "I'm very impressed with what you've built here." "We built it for Mom," Daisy said, her voice clear and strong, "and for all the other parents who stay." The words hickened like physical blows. He saw Anna's hands tighten on Violet's shoulders, saw the protective way the girls moved closer to their mother. "The judges are coming," Iris warned, and everyone shifted into presentation mode. But the air crackled with unspoken words and unanswered questions. James moved to the back of the crowd gathering around their booth. He watched as his daughters presented their project with confidence and grace. They moved in perfect sync, finishing each other's sentences, supporting each other's points. Anna stood nearby, her face glowing with pride. The life he'd walked away from was right in front of him, not just 4 babies he'd been too scared to face, but 4 brilliant young women who'd turned their own challenge into a way to help others. And Anna, who'd done what he couldn't stayed, struggled, succeeded. As applause broke out around the booth, James realized this wasn't the end of the confrontation, it was just the beginning. The evening after the competition, rain pattered against the windows of a small cafe near the convention center. The Quadruplets project had won first place, but nobody was celebrating. Instead, 5 people sat around a corner table, cups of untouched tea growing cold. "Why did you leave?" Rose asked, breaking the heavy silence. She sat between her sisters, their matching blue dresses now wrinkled from the long day. James stared into his cup, the question he dreaded for 12 years hanging in the air. Anna sat at the far end, her hand resting protectively near Violet, who'd barely spoken since they'd sat down. "I was scared," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "When your mother told me she was pregnant, I panicked." "Scared of babies?" Daisy asked, skepticism clear in her voice. Scared of becoming my father, James replied, looking up at their faces, his mother's eyes reflected 4 times over. My father, he left us when I was 10. Left my mother with nothing but debts and broken promises. I grew up watching her struggle, working 3 jobs, barely keeping us afloat. Iris's fingers moved across her tablet screen, fact-checking as she listened. Your company started that same year. The year you left. I told myself I needed to succeed first, James continued, shame coloring his words. That I couldn't be a good father while struggling to build my dream. I convinced myself I'd come back once I'd made it. But you didn't, Violet said softly, speaking for the first time. Even after you became rich. Anna's hand tightened on her daughter's shoulder. By then, I'd already learned we could make it on our own. The day I left, James said, his voice cracking, I didn't know about the quadruplets. I thought, 1 baby was terrifying enough. I was sure I'd fail, just like my father failed me. So you failed us first. Rose's words cut through the air like a knife. The waitress approached their table, saw their expressions, and quietly backed away. Outside, the rain grew heavier, drumming against the windows. Tell them about the day they were born, James said to Anna, his eyes pleading. I need to know. Anna took a deep breath, her eyes distant with memory. It was a difficult pregnancy. The doctors wanted me on bed rest, but I had to keep working. Mrs. John from next door brought me food every day. My therapy clients agreed to online sessions. The girls listened intently, though they'd heard parts of this story before. The delivery was emergency, Anna continued. I was only 7 months along. Each of you weighed less than 2 kilograms. The nurses had to teach me how to feed 4 babies with tubes, how to make sure you all got enough attention. James's hands gripped his cup tightly. I should have been there. Yes, you should have, Anna agreed, her voice firm but not unkind. But we managed. Rose learned to walk first, always so determined. Iris figured out how to unlock my phone before she could talk. Violet hummed lullabies to her sisters when they cried. And Daisy, she smiled softly, Daisy made sure everyone knew when she needed attention. The app we created, Iris said, pulling up their project on her tablet, it has all these features because of Mom's stories. About how hard it was to find resources to build a support network. We interviewed hundreds of single parents, Rose added. Their stories, they're all different, but they all stayed, they all tried. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a wrinkled envelope, the one that had started everything. Who sent me these photos? The girls exchanged glances. Finally, Daisy spoke up. That was me. I found your business address online. The others helped, but sending the photos was my idea. Why? Because, Daisy said, her voice trembling slightly, we wanted to know if you care enough to look for us. Lily's latest text message flashed on James's phone screen, another angry demand about wedding preparations. He turned the phone face down without reading it. I know I can't fix what I broke, he said slowly. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But seeing what you've all become, what you've achieved despite me, not because of me. I've never been more ashamed of any choice I've made, or more proud, he added quietly, looking at each girl in turn. Your app will help so many families. You took your own pain and turned it into something beautiful. That's more than I ever did with mine. The rain outside had softened to a gentle patter. The cafe was nearly empty now, the evening growing late. 4 identical faces looked at their father, the stranger they'd researched, planned to meet, and now finally knew. Each face held a different expression, Rose's careful analysis, Iris's thoughtful consideration, Violet's quiet observation, and Daisy's open challenge. We don't need a father anymore, Rose said finally. We grew up just fine without one. But Violet added softly, maybe we could use a friend who knows about coding and business. For the app. It was a small opening, barely a crack in the wall 12 years had built. But as James looked at his daughters' faces, then at Anna's cautious nod, he realized it was more than he deserved, and everything he hoped for. The weeks following the competition brought changes nobody had expected. James's engagement announcement disappeared from the society pages, replaced by business headlines about his sudden step back from daily operations at his company. His luxurious penthouse sat empty while he rented a small apartment closer to his daughter's neighborhood. One sunny Saturday morning, he sat in Anna's garden, surrounded by 4 laptops and 4 very different reactions to his presence. They'd agreed to meet weekly to work on expanding their app, which had caught the attention of several major tech companies. The user interface needs work, Rose stated bluntly, turning her screen to show him. It's not intuitive enough for parents who aren't tech-savvy. What if we added voice commands? James suggested carefully, watching their reactions. For parents who might be holding a baby while using the app. Iris's eyes lit up at the technical challenge, though she tried to hide her enthusiasm. We'd need to build a natural language processing system. I could help with that, James offered. My company has some experience in voice recognition technology. Violet, who'd been sketching new icons for the app, looked up briefly before returning to her work. She hadn't quite warmed up to him yet, but she'd stopped leaving the room when he arrived. Daisy sprawled on the grass nearby, supposedly testing the app but actually watching him like a hawk. Of all the girls, she remained the most openly skeptical of his attempts to make amends. "Why did you really break up with Lily?" she asked suddenly, making everyone freeze. It was all over the news. James set down his laptop, knowing this moment needed his full attention, because I couldn't start a new family while trying to make things right with my real one. "We're not your family yet," Rose reminded him sharply. "You're just helping with our app." "I know," he said quietly, "and that's more than I deserve." Inside the house, Anna watched through the window while preparing lunch. Mrs. Jean had stopped by with her famous dumplings, claiming she was just in the neighborhood, though everyone knew she was curious about the new developments. "He's trying," Mrs. Jean observed, folding dumplings with practiced ease. "That counts for something." "It's not that simple," Anna replied, but her voice held less edge than before. Back in the garden, the coding session had evolved into an impromptu tech support lesson. James showed them tricks he'd learned over the years, while they impressed him with innovative solutions they'd developed on their own. "Mom's birthday is next month," Violet mentioned casually, not looking up from her screen. "We're planning a surprise party." The invitation hung in the air, neither extended nor withdrawn. James nodded, understanding the delicate balance. "I'm sure she'll love whatever you plan." "She likes chocolate cake," Daisy added, her tone challenging. "Not those fancy pastries you probably ate." "Actually," James smiled slightly, "I haven't had a good chocolate cake since the last one she made." The memory hung between them. Anna's small kitchen, a slightly lopsided cake, happiness that had seemed so simple then. Rose's phone buzzed with a notification. "The App Store approved our latest update," she announced, changing the subject. The tension eased as they gathered around her screen, professional focus returning. "Look at these download numbers," Iris marveled. "We're helping so many people." "You did that," James said proudly. "All of you. You saw a need and filled it. That's more important than any tech empire I built." "Speaking of empires," Daisy piped up, "the news says your company's stock dropped when you stepped back. Aren't you worried?" James looked at her directly. "Some things matter more than stock prices. I learned that too late, but I learned it." Violet suddenly spoke up, her voice quiet but clear. "Our school's having a father-daughter dance next month." The garden went silent. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. "We're not going," Rose said quickly. "We never go to those things." "But," Violet continued, still not looking up, "there's a tech fair the same weekend. We need someone who knows about investor presentations." James felt the weight of what she was offering. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a chance to be useful, to be present, to be something. "I'd be happy to help with the tech fair," he said carefully, "if everyone agrees." The other girls exchanged looks, their silent communication system that excluded everyone else. Finally, Rose nodded. "Just the tech fair, not the dance." "Just the tech fair," James agreed. Inside, Anna and Mrs. Zhang watched the scene unfold. "Baby steps," Mrs. Zhang said wisely, passing Anna another dumpling to fold. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the garden where a father was learning to listen and 4 daughters were learning to trust, not all at once, not completely, but slowly, like the apps they were building together, one careful line of code at a time. The high school auditorium buzzed with excitement on graduation day. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of proud families. In the front row, Anna sat with tears in her eyes, watching the stage where 4 identical graduation robes couldn't hide 4 very different young women. And now, the principal announced, we have a unique situation in our school's history. Our valedictorians this year are not 1, but 4 remarkable students. The quadruplets rose together, their movements synchronized from years of practice. As they approached the podium, their golden honor chords swayed in perfect rhythm. When we were asked to give this speech, Rose began, her voice strong and clear. We decided to share it, just like we shared everything else in our lives. Our journey hasn't been typical, Iris continued, adjusting her glasses. We grew up with one amazing parent who taught us that family isn't about having everything. It's about making the most of what you have, Violet added softly, her confidence grown over the years. And sometimes, Daisy finished, it's about learning to accept new additions to that family, even when they come a little late. In the audience, James sat a few seats away from Anna, dressed in a simple suit rather than his usual designer wear. The past few years had changed him. His company still thrived, but now he worked remotely 3 days a week, dedicating time to testing new features for the family support app his daughters had created. Our app started as a school project, Rose explained to the audience. But it grew into something bigger, something that helps thousands of families now. We learned that success isn't just about making money, Iris said, glancing at their father. It's about making a difference. And that forgiveness, Violet added, her quiet voice carrying clearly through the hall, isn't a single moment, but a journey. A journey that's better when you take it together, Daisy concluded. In her seat, Anna wiped away tears, remembering the tiny babies who'd once fit in the crook of her arm. Now they stood tall, confident, ready to head off to different colleges, but promising to stay connected through daily video calls. The girls had each chosen different paths. Rose accepted a scholarship in business administration, Iris in computer science, Violet in user experience design, and Daisy in communications. Their app had grown into a successful startup with users across the country. Before we end, Rose said, we want to thank 2 people. Our mother, who showed us that one parent's love can be more than enough. Who worked extra hours to buy us our first laptops, Iris added. Who never missed a single science fair, Violet smiled. And who makes the best chocolate cake in the world, Daisy grinned. Anna laughed through her tears, remembering all those late-night baking sessions. And Rose continued, her voice softening slightly, we want to thank someone who taught us that it's never too late to try to make things right. In his seat, James felt his chest tighten. Someone who learned that success isn't measured in stock prices, Iris said. Who showed up every weekend to help debug our code, Violet added. And who finally learned to appreciate chocolate cake, Daisy finished, drawing gentle laughter from the crowd. After the ceremony, they gathered in the garden where it had all started. Mrs. Shan had outdone herself, preparing a feast that covered 3 tables. The app's success logo hung beside the graduation decorations, symbolizing both endings and beginnings. Have you decided about the office space? James asked as they ate. We're taking it, Rose answered. The startup incubator program loved our pitch. And the location is perfect, Iris added. Close enough that we can come home for Mom's cooking. And movie nights, Violet smiled. And debugging sessions, Daisy winked at their father. Anna watched them all, her heart full. The past few years hadn't been perfect. There had been arguments, tears, and moments of doubt. But they'd built something new, something different from the traditional family they'd thought they should have. To new beginnings, James raised his glass of lemonade, looking at his daughters with pride, and at Anna with respectful gratitude. To family, the girls responded in unison, their old habit of speaking together making everyone smile. As the evening wound down, the garden lights twinkled like stars. The girls huddled over Iris's laptop, showing Mrs. Shang their latest app update. Anna and James sat at opposite ends of the garden, comfortable now in their roles as co-parents who had found their own kind of peace. They did good, James said softly. You did good. We all did, Anna replied, watching their daughters laugh together. In our own way, in our own time. Above them, the real stars began to appear, witnessing a family that had been broken but found its way to something new. Not perfect, not traditional, but real and strong and growing, like the lines of code that had brought them back together.